It was a quiet little town, the kind where people knew each other's names and daily routines. At the edge of this town lived a man named Daniel. To most people, Daniel was just a single father who spent his days working with wood, fixing furniture, and taking small jobs here and there. He was polite, always ready to help neighbors with small repairs, but never the type to share much about his personal life. People respected him, but they never really knew him. Daniel had a daughter who was 10 years old. She was his entire world. Every morning, he woke up early to make her breakfast, braided her hair for school, and walked her down the small dirt road until the school bus arrived. The other parents often admired how devoted he was. Many single fathers would have struggled, but Daniel seemed to find his balance. He never missed a school event, and every evening he helped her with homework. Life for the two of them looked ordinary, even simple, but behind his calm smile, Daniel carried secrets no one could imagine. To the town, Daniel was the carpenter, but to himself, he was a man running away from a past he wished no one would ever discover. Years ago, before he ever thought of raising a daughter alone, Daniel had been trained for missions where survival depended on silence, speed, and strength. That life had left marks on him, not the kind you could see on skin, but the kind that stayed in the heart. After a mission that went terribly wrong, costing him his wife and leaving him alone with a little baby, Daniel had walked away. He chose peace over war, quiet over chaos. The forest near his home was his favorite place. On weekends, he would take his daughter hiking. He wanted her to grow up brave and curious, close to nature. They would walk the narrow trails, pointing out birds, wildflowers, and streams. It was their private escape, far from town noise. She loved it, and he loved seeing her smile. One late afternoon, as the sun began to set and painted the sky orange, Daniel and his daughter were on one of their usual walks. The forest air was cool, and the sound of leaves crunching under their shoes was the only noise. They were halfway along a trail when Daniel heard something unusual. At first, it was faint, like twigs snapping somewhere deeper in the woods. He stopped, listening carefully. His daughter looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy," she whispered. "Shoo," he replied softly, placing a finger on his lips. Then a moment later, it came clearer. The sound of someone running, heavy steps, and then a sharp, desperate cry. A woman's voice cut through the stillness of the forest. "Help. Somebody, please." Daniel's body reacted before his mind did. His heart pounded, but his face stayed calm. He knelt quickly beside his daughter. "Listen to me. You need to hide, right now, behind those bushes. Don't come out until I call you. Understand?" She nodded nervously, trusting him completely. He gave her a small, reassuring squeeze on the shoulder before standing up and turning toward the sound. Through the trees, a figure appeared. A young woman stumbled into view, her clothes torn by branches, her face pale with fear. She was running wildly, looking back over her shoulder. Behind her, two men burst from the shadows, chasing her with fierce determination. The woman's eyes locked onto Daniel. Relief and terror mixed in her gaze as she gasped, "Please, they're after me." Daniel felt a familiar fire ignite inside him, a fire he had tried to bury for years. To anyone else, the situation would have been overwhelming. Two men, strangers, dangerous, charging forward in the middle of nowhere. But to Daniel, it was like stepping into a world he once knew all too well. His breathing slowed, his mind sharpened, and every movement of the pursuers became clear to him. The first man reached out to grab the woman, but Daniel moved in between them with lightning speed. His hand shot forward, blocking the man's arm, twisting it with perfect precision. The attacker yelped and fell to his knees. The second man lunged, but Daniel stepped aside, using his opponent's momentum against him. With one sharp move, he sent the man tumbling into the dirt. The woman froze, shocked by what she was witnessing. The fight lasted less than a minute, but to her it felt unreal. Daniel's actions were clean, efficient, and powerful, the kind of movements only someone trained for combat could make. The two men scrambled back to their feet, glaring at him. One hissed, "You don't know what you're getting into." Daniel's voice was steady, low, and dangerous. "Leave. Now." There was something in his eyes that made the men hesitate. They exchanged nervous glances, then cursed under their breath before backing away into the trees, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Silence returned. The woman collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. Daniel extended a hand to her. "You're safe now," he said softly. She took his hand, trembling, still unable to understand what had just happened. Thank you so much," she whispered. Daniel nodded, but didn't smile. Inside, he felt a storm brewing. He hadn't fought like that in years. He hadn't wanted anyone to see that side of him. But tonight, in this forest, in front of his daughter hiding in the bushes, his past had broken through the quiet life he had tried so hard to protect. From the distance, he heard his daughter's small voice. "Daddy, is it over?" Daniel turned his head. His heart softened instantly. "It's over," he called back gently. She ran into his arms, hugging him tightly, still shaken. The woman looked at him, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear. She had just witnessed something she couldn't explain, a quiet carpenter fighting with the skill of a soldier. Daniel knew this was only the beginning. What had happened in those few minutes would soon spread beyond this forest. Questions would come. Whispers would rise in town. And the secret he had kept for so long was no longer safe. Daniel walked slowly out of the forest with his daughter, holding tightly to his hand, and the woman following close behind. The sun had dipped lower, and the sky was turning darker shades of red and purple. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the weight of eyes on him, not just the woman's, but the sense that his carefully built walls of privacy were about to crack. The woman's breathing was still uneven, and she clutched her arms as if the memory of being chased still clung to her skin. She glanced at Daniel several times as they walked, as though trying to find words. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know what I would have done if you weren't there. They would have caught me." Daniel didn't respond right away. He kept his eyes on the path, his face calm, though his mind was racing. His daughter looked up at him, confused but trusting, and that only deepened the knot in his chest. When they reached the edge of the forest, Daniel paused. "Do you live nearby?" he asked gently. The woman nodded. "Yes, down by the old bridge road. But I can't go back tonight. They'll find me." There was a fear in her voice that Daniel couldn't ignore. He sighed, then pointed toward his truck parked near the trail entrance. "Come on. I'll drive you somewhere safe." She hesitated for a moment, then followed. His daughter climbed into the back seat, and Daniel opened the passenger door for the woman. She slid in carefully, still looking at him as though trying to solve a puzzle she didn't yet understand. The ride into town was quiet at first, the only sound the hum of the engine. Daniel's daughter leaned her head against the window, watching the fading light. The woman finally broke the silence. "You don't move like an ordinary man," she said softly. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "What do you mean?" "I mean the way you fought them. I've never seen anything like it. You knew exactly what to do, like you've been trained." His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. He didn't like where the conversation was going. For years, he had carefully avoided any hint of his past. In this town, he was just Daniel, the carpenter, the father. Nothing more. But tonight had changed everything. "I just did what I had to do," he said finally, his voice flat. The woman turned to look out the window, but he could feel her curiosity burning like fire beside him. She wanted answers. When they reached the small diner on the edge of town, Daniel pulled into the parking lot. "You'll be safe here," he said. "Plenty of people around. I'll call the sheriff and let him know what happened." The woman shook her head quickly, panic flashing in her eyes. "No, please don't involve the sheriff. They'll know I spoke up. They'll come after me harder." Daniel studied her face, realizing this was more complicated than he thought. This wasn't just two strangers attacking a woman in the woods. There was something bigger happening, something she wasn't ready to explain. He took a deep breath. "Then, at least stay here tonight. I'll make sure no one bothers you." The woman hesitated, but finally nodded. "Thank you." As she stepped out of the truck, Daniel's daughter leaned forward from back seat. "Daddy, who was she running from?" Daniel looked at her, searching for the right words. "Some people who shouldn't be chasing anyone," he said carefully. But you don't have to worry. I won't let anything happen to you." She gave a small nod, but Daniel could see the questions in her eyes too. She had seen everything. The fight, the way he moved, the side of him he had hidden even from her. That night, after dropping the woman at the diner, Daniel returned home with his daughter. The house felt different. It was the same small home filled with the smell of wood shavings and the warmth of old photographs. But there was a tension in the air now. His daughter sat at the kitchen table, while Daniel made her a simple dinner. She finally spoke, her voice soft. "Daddy, how did you know how to fight like that?" Daniel froze for a moment, his hand resting on the counter. He had hoped she wouldn't ask, at least not so soon. But she was smart, too smart to accept silence as an answer. He turned, forcing a gentle smile. "When I was younger, before you were born, I learned some things. I had to back then." "Like in the army?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Something like that." Her eyes lit with a mix of wonder and confusion. "But why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because that part of my life is over," he said quietly. "I don't want you to think of me that way. I just want to be your dad." She didn't argue. She simply nodded again, though the weight of her silence told him she was still thinking about it. Later that evening, after putting her to bed, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table. The clock ticked softly on the wall. His mind replayed the fight in the forest, the fear in the woman's eyes, the way the man had spoken before retreating. "You don't know what you're getting into." Those words stuck with him. Whoever they weren't just petty criminals. They were part of something larger. And now, whether he wanted to or not, Daniel was involved. The next morning, word had already spread around town. At the local grocery store, whispers followed him as he walked down the aisles. A neighbor approached, eyes wide. "Daniel, I heard you stopped some men in the woods last night. Is it true?" Daniel offered a small shrug, avoiding details. Just help someone in trouble. But that only fueled the rumors more. By midday, people were saying Daniel had fought off armed attackers with his bare hands, that he had taken down 2 men twice his size. Some even joked he must have been in the military. Daniel hated the attention. He wanted to disappear back into his quiet life. But deep down, he knew the quiet was gone. The woman he had saved knew he wasn't just a carpenter. The town was beginning to suspect the same. And somewhere out there, the men he had faced were still watching, still waiting. That evening, as he tucked his daughter into bed, he looked out the window into the dark trees beyond his backyard. For the first time in years, he felt that old tension in his muscles, the one that came before a storm. He whispered to himself, so quietly his daughter couldn't hear. "It's starting again." The next few days passed quietly, but the silence felt different now. Daniel went about his routine, waking early, making breakfast, walking his daughter to the bus stop, but a shadow lingered behind everything he did. He found himself glancing over his shoulder more often, checking the locks twice at night, and listening to every creak of the wooden house after dark. The woman he had rescued, Emily, hadn't disappeared from his mind either. He thought about her frightened face, the way she had begged him not to call the sheriff. Whoever those men were, they weren't random strangers. They had hunted her for a reason, and that reason was still out there. On the 3rd evening after the rescue, Daniel was fixing a broken chair in his workshop when he heard a soft knock at his door. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over carefully, his instincts already alert. When he opened the door, Emily stood there, her hair tied back, her face pale but determined. "Can I come in?" she asked. Daniel stepped aside silently and motioned her toward the kitchen table. His daughter was in her room reading, so the house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Emily sat down, her hands gripping each other tightly. "I owe you an explanation," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Daniel leaned against the counter, folding his arms. He didn't rush her. He knew sometimes silence was the best way to let someone speak. "They weren't just trying to scare me," she continued. "Those men, they work for people you don't want to cross. I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Something bad. They've been after me ever since." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What did you see?" Emily lowered her eyes. "A meeting. Deals being made, money being passed. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I walked in by mistake. I thought it was just a storage place. I didn't know." Her voice broke, and she swallowed hard. "They told me if I talked, I'd disappear. And I think they meant it." Daniel stayed silent, but inside his mind was racing. Criminal networks, secret meetings, threats. This wasn't something the local sheriff could handle easily. This was bigger, much bigger. "Why didn't you leave town?" he asked finally. "I tried," she whispered. "But they follow me. No matter where I go, they find me." Daniel exhaled slowly. "So you came to me." Her eyes lifted to meet his, searching for something. "I came because I don't know who else to trust. The way you fought them. You're not just some carpenter. I know it. And I think you know what they're capable of." Daniel's silence was answer enough. At that moment, footsteps padded softly into the kitchen. His daughter appeared in the doorway, holding a book in her hand. "Daddy, who's here?" Daniel's expression softened instantly. "It's all right, sweetheart. Just someone I helped the other night." Emily gave the girl a small smile, but Daniel could see the worry in both their faces. His daughter tilted her head curiously, looking back and forth between them, but didn't press for answers. She simply nodded and returned to her room. When she was gone, Daniel spoke in a low voice. "You can stay here tonight, but tomorrow we figure out what to do. You can't keep running forever." Emily nodded gratefully, though the fear in her eyes didn't fade. That night, Daniel didn't sleep much. He sat by the window, the lights off, watching the trees sway in the dark. His instincts kept telling him the same thing. This wasn't over. Those men weren't finished. And sooner or later, they'd come back. He was right. The next evening, as Daniel walked his daughter home from the store, he noticed a black SUV parked at the corner of the road. The engine was off, but he could see two figures sitting inside, watching. His chest tightened. He kept his face calm for his daughter's sake, but every step home felt heavier. When they reached the house, he sent her inside and lingered on the porch, his eyes fixed on the vehicle down the street. It didn't move. Not until the sun dipped below the horizon. Only then did the headlights flash on, and the SUV slowly drove away. Later that night, when Emily was helping wash the dishes, Daniel spoke quietly. "They're watching. They know you're here." Her face drained of color. "What do we do?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at his daughter's backpack resting near the door, her shoes tucked neatly beside it. For years, he had built this quiet life to protect her. He had buried his past so she would never know the dangers he had once faced. But now, that past was clawing its way back. Finally, he said, "We prepare." Emily frowned. "Prepare for what?" "For when they come," Daniel said simply. His voice carried a calmness that unsettled her. It was the voice of a man who had already lived through storms, who knew exactly how bad things could get, and was ready to face them again. That night, Daniel went to the shed behind his house. Buried beneath tools and old boxes was a locked trunk he hadn't opened in years. His hands hesitated for only a moment before pulling it out. When the lid creaked open, Emily, who had followed him quietly, gasped softly. Inside was a carefully packed set of items. A few tactical knives, heavy boots, and a small folded uniform patch that read SEAL Team. Emily stared at him, realization dawning. You were in the Navy?" Daniel's eyes remained on the trunk. "Not just the Navy," he said quietly. "I was part of a team most people never hear about. We were trained to go where others couldn't, to do what others wouldn't." Emily shook her head in disbelief. "And you gave it all up to live here?" Daniel finally looked up, his gaze steady. "I gave it up to raise my daughter. She's the only mission that matters now." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Emily whispered, "But now you'll have to fight again." Daniel closed the trunk, his expression unreadable. "If they bring danger to my home, then yes, I'll fight." The following day, Daniel began making quiet preparations. He reinforced the locks, repaired the old fence, and set up simple traps in the woods behind his property. Tricks he had learned years ago that could slow intruders. His daughter thought he was just fixing the place up, but Emily watched him with knowing eyes. By the time night fell, the air around the house felt different. The stillness was heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Daniel sat at the table with Emily across from him. Neither spoke much, but both knew the truth. The men were coming back. And this time, Daniel would be ready. The sun rose slowly over the small town, painting the streets in gold. But Daniel felt no warmth from it. His days of peace were over, and he knew it. Every sound outside made his instincts twitch. Every car that slowed near his house, every stranger's glance, it all carried weight now. He tried to keep life normal for his daughter. He still walked her to the bus stop, still packed her lunch, still sat with her at night to check homework. But she wasn't blind. She saw the way he scanned the street before stepping out, the way his jaw tightened when headlights passed by too slowly. She saw him checking the locks twice, sometimes 3 times, before bed. One morning at the grocery store, whispers followed him down the aisle. 2 older men leaned against the produce stand, speaking low, but not low enough. "Did you hear? They say Daniel took out 2 men in the forest with his bare hands." No surprise. Always knew he wasn't just some handyman. "Did you see the way he looks around? That man's seen things." Daniel ignored them, keeping his head down as he picked up bread and milk. But he could feel eyes on him everywhere. The story of what had happened in the forest had spread, and with it came questions he had no intention of answering. At the checkout line, the cashier, a friendly woman who had known Daniel since he moved into town, leaned forward with a curious smile. "Daniel, you've got to tell us the truth. Were you in the military?" Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. "I used to be," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "Well, that explains it. Folks around here are saying you're some kind of hero." Daniel only shook his head. "I'm not a hero, just a father." But as he walked out of a store with his groceries, he knew the quiet was gone. His past was no longer just his secret. Back at the house, Emily was waiting for him on the porch. She had barely slept, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "They know, don't they?" she asked as soon as he walked up the steps. Daniel set the bags down. "They know enough to start talking." She nodded, her hands tightening around the edge of her jacket. "And what about them? The men in the SUV?" Daniel's gaze hardened. "They'll be back. They're not done." That night, after his daughter went to bed, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with Emily. She stared at him across the dimly lit room. "You can't hide it anymore," she said softly. "People are going to keep asking questions. About who you are. About what you were." Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "They don't need to know. The less they know, the safer they are." "But I need to know," Emily said, her voice trembling. "If I'm staying here, if I'm dragging you into this, I need to know who you really are." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he rose from his chair, walked to the window, and stared out at the dark trees swaying beyond his yard. His voice was quiet when he spoke, but every word carried weight. "I was a Navy SEAL," he admitted. "I spent years going places most people couldn't even find on a map. Missions that never made the news. Missions we couldn't talk about, even to our families. I lived in shadows, fighting battles no one else would ever know about." Emily sat frozen, listening. "One mission went wrong," he continued. His voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. "We walked into a trap. I made it out, but my wife, she didn't. After that, I couldn't keep going. I had a daughter who needed me, so I walked away. I left it all behind." Silence filled the room, heavy and raw. Emily's eyes glistened. "And now it's finding you again." Daniel nodded slowly. "I tried to bury that part of me, but some things they don't stay buried." Before Emily could respond, the sound of tires crunching gravel broke the stillness. Both of them turned toward the window. A dark vehicle had pulled up at the end of the road, headlights dim. Daniel's chest tightened. "They're here." He moved quickly, his training taking over. "Stay inside," he ordered Emily. "Lock the doors. Keep the lights off." "What about your daughter?" Emily whispered. Daniel's voice softened. "She sleeps through almost anything. She won't know a thing unless I let her." He stepped out onto the porch, his boots silent on the wood. The night air was cool, the silence sharp. The vehicle's engine turned off, and two men stepped out, their silhouettes barely visible in the moonlight. One of them called out, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "We're not here to fight, Daniel. We just want the girl." Daniel's jaw clenched. "She's not yours to take." "You don't understand," the man replied. "She saw something she wasn't supposed to. If she talks, it'll bring down more than just us. Walk away now, and no one has to get hurt." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You came to my home. That was your first mistake." The men exchanged a look, then began walking closer. Daniel's stance shifted, calm but ready. He had been hoping to avoid this, but he knew there was no turning back now. From inside, Emily watched through the window, her hands trembling as she clutched the curtain. She saw the way Daniel stood, the way his shoulders squared, the way his body moved with practiced readiness. He wasn't just a carpenter. He wasn't just a father. He was something far more dangerous. The men stopped a few yards away. One smirked. "We'll be back, Daniel. And next time, you won't stop us." They turned, climbed into their vehicle, and drove off into the night, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. Daniel stood still on the porch long after the sound of the engine faded. His breathing was steady, but inside, his heart hammered. He knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. When he finally stepped back inside, Emily stared at him with wide eyes. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Daniel shook his head. "No. And when they come back, they won't be asking." Emily swallowed hard. "Then what do we do?" Daniel closed the door, bolting it firmly. His eyes were dark, but steady. "We prepare for war." The days that followed carried a heavy stillness, like the pause before a storm. Daniel moved with quiet purpose, his every action sharpened by memory. The traps he built around the property weren't visible to an untrained eye. Wires carefully hidden under leaves, loose boards positioned near the shed, branches arranged to make noise if stepped on. He didn't want a battlefield, but he knew one was coming. His daughter noticed the changes. She asked why he was fixing things he had never bothered with before. Daniel smiled and told her he just wanted their home safer. She accepted his answer, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Children had a way of sensing storms even before they broke. Emily, meanwhile, carried her fear like a weight she couldn't put down. She helped where she could, moving tools, watching the road, but at night she lay awake, listening for engines in the distance. Every crunch of gravel, every bark of a dog, every creak of the house sent her heart racing. On the fourth night, the storm came. It started quietly, just as Daniel expected. He was sitting near the window, the lights off, his daughter asleep in her room. Emily sat on the couch, hugging her knees, her eyes wide. Then came the low hum of engines. Not one vehicle this time, but several. Headlights flashed briefly down the road, then went dark. Daniel rose to his feet, calm but alert. "They're here." Emily's breath caught. "What do we do?" "You stay with my daughter," Daniel said firmly. "Don't leave her side, no matter what you hear." She shook her head. "Daniel, promise me," he cut in, his voice leaving no room for argument. Emily swallowed hard, then nodded. Daniel stepped outside into the cool night air. The moon was hidden by clouds, making the yard dark, shadows stretching across the grass. He moved with steady steps toward the edge of the property. That's when he saw them. 3 vehicles parked just beyond the trees. At least half a dozen men slipped out, their movements deliberate, confident. These weren't amateurs. One of them called out, his voice low but clear. "You had your chance, Daniel. Hand over the girl." Daniel stood tall, his voice calm. "She's not yours. You want her, you'll have to come through me." The men spread out, advancing slowly. One of them smirked. "Then so be it." The first step onto the yard triggered a snap. A branch whipped upward, striking the man's leg hard enough to drop him with a grunt. Before he could recover, another misstep set off a can that clattered loudly, breaking their stealth. Daniel didn't move. He let them come. 2 men rushed forward. Daniel shifted smoothly, dodging one swing, grabbing the man's arm, and flipping him hard into the ground. The second lunged, but Daniel countered with a sharp strike, sending him sprawling. The others hesitated for a brief moment, realizing this wouldn't be easy. Inside the house, Emily clutched Daniel's daughter tightly, both of them listening to the chaos outside. "Daddy," the girl whispered, her small voice trembling. "He'll be okay," Emily whispered back, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. But there were too many of them. For every man he dropped, another came forward. Daniel's chest rose and fell heavily, his muscles straining, his movements efficient but tiring. One of the attackers managed to swing a fist across his jaw, snapping his head sideways. Pain flared, but it only sharpened his focus. He fought like a man with something worth protecting. Every strike, every block wasn't just about survival. It was about his daughter sleeping inside. The leader of the group stepped forward finally, calm and smug. "You can't win, Daniel. You'll break before we stop coming." Daniel wiped blood from his lip, his eyes cold. "You underestimate how far a father will go." The leader gave a nod, and the men circled again. But this time, Daniel wasn't alone. From the house came a sudden noise, pots crashing in the kitchen window. It was Emily slamming metal pans together, shouting, "The sheriff's on his way. Leave now." The men froze, glancing at each other. Their confidence faltered. The idea of the law arriving was enough to shake them. Daniel seized the moment. He lunged at the leader, tackling him to the ground with brutal force. His hands locked around the man's wrist, disarming him of a knife and sending it clattering away. He pressed his forearm hard against the man's throat. "Tell him to back off," Daniel growled. The leader gasped, choking. "Stand down," he rasped. Reluctantly, the men stepped back, their eyes darting nervously between Daniel and the road behind them. The distant echo of sirens reached their ears, a bluff on Emily's part, but they didn't know that. Daniel shoved the leader aside and stood tall, his chest heaving. "If you come near this house again," he warned, his voice like steel, "I won't stop at knocking you down. I'll end it." The leader coughed, glaring up at him. But he gave a small nod, and the men retreated, dragging their injured with them. Engines roared to life, and the vehicles sped off into the night, leaving only silence behind. Daniel stood there for a long moment, his fists still clenched, his breathing steadying. Then he turned and walked back to the house. Inside, Emily and his daughter rushed to him. His little girl threw her arms around his waist, tears streaking her cheeks. "Daddy, I was so scared." Daniel knelt, holding her tightly. "It's okay. I promised you I won't let anything happen to you." Emily stood nearby, watching him with awe. "You saved us," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "No, I just did what I had to." But inside he knew the truth. This wasn't over. The men would be back, or worse, others would come. The fight he had tried to leave behind was pulling him back in, piece by piece. As he tucked his daughter into bed that night, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy, are you a soldier?" Daniel hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "I used to be," he said softly. "But now I'm just your dad. And that's the most important thing." She smiled sleepily, trusting his words, and drifted off to sleep. Daniel stood in the doorway for a long time, his heart heavy. Emily approached quietly, her voice low. "You can't hide who you are anymore." Daniel looked at her, his eyes tired but resolute. "No, but maybe it's time I stop hiding." Outside, the night was quiet again. But Daniel knew the storm hadn't passed, it had only paused. The morning after the fight, the town felt different. News spread fast in a small place like this, and whispers carried louder than shouts. By the time Daniel stepped out to get the newspaper, two neighbors across the street were already staring, their voices hushed but curious. "Did you hear? He fought off a whole group of men last night. They say he used to be military, some kind of special forces." Daniel ignored the talk, but he could feel the weight of it pressing down. For years, he had built this quiet life to keep eyes away from him. Now everyone was looking. Inside, Emily sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She looked exhausted, her face pale. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "You know that, don't you? They'll regroup. They'll come back stronger." Daniel poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "I know." Emily's voice trembled. "Then what are we going to do?" Daniel glanced toward the hallway, where his daughter's laughter drifted from her room as she played with her toys. That sound gave him strength, but it also sharpened his resolve. "We end it," he said firmly. Emily frowned. "End it? How?" "By making sure they can't chase you anymore." That afternoon, Daniel made calls he hadn't planned to ever make again. Not to the sheriff. This was beyond the sheriff's reach, but to a man he trusted from long ago, a quiet contact who still owed him favors. It had been years, but when the man on the other end heard Daniel's name, his tone shifted instantly. Respect and a little fear laced his words. "You sure about this?" the voice asked. "I don't have a choice," Daniel replied. By evening, Daniel had a plan. He explained it to Emily in simple terms. They weren't going to wait for the men to come again. They would go where the danger started, cut it off at the source. It was the only way to protect his daughter, Emily, and the town. Emily's eyes widened. "You mean you're going after them?" Daniel nodded. "They think they're hunters. Tonight, they'll learn they're the ones being hunted." When darkness fell, Daniel left his daughter safe with a trusted neighbor who owed him kindness for years of quiet help. He promised her he'd be back soon, that she didn't need to worry. She hugged him tight, whispering, "Come home safe, Daddy." Those words stayed in his heart as he and Emily drove out of town, following directions from Daniel's old contact. The road led them to an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the county, a place Emily instantly recognized, the very spot where she had seen the men exchange money and threats weeks ago. Daniel stepped into the night. Every movement was silent, precise. The old instincts were alive again, guiding him like muscle memory. He approached the building low, scanning shadows, counting guards. 2 men at the door, one smoking, the other pacing. Daniel moved quickly. A sharp strike dropped the smoker. A swift twist disarmed the second before he even knew what hit him. Inside, voices echoed. The leader from before stood near a table, papers and money spread across it. 3 men surrounded him, all armed. They were laughing, confident, unaware the storm had already entered the room. Daniel stepped from the shadows. "This ends tonight." The men spun around, startled. The leader's face twisted into a sneer. "You again. I warned you." Daniel's voice was steady. "And I told you, no one touches her. No one comes near my family." The first man lunged with a knife. Daniel sidestepped, his hand locking the attacker's wrist and slamming him into the table. Another rushed in, swinging a bat, but Daniel ducked low, striking upward with brutal precision. The man fell groaning. The leader pulled a gun, aiming straight at Daniel. "You think you can stop us all?" he growled. Daniel's eyes were ice cold. "I don't think. I know." He moved faster than the leader expected, knocking the gun aside and driving his shoulder into the man's chest. The weapon clattered across the floor. They grappled, fists striking, bodies slamming against crates. Outside, Emily watched through the cracked door, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream, to run in, but she remembered his words. Stay put. Inside, the fight raged. Daniel's muscles burned. His breaths came heavy, but his mind was sharp. Every strike was fueled not just by training, but by purpose. This wasn't about missions or orders anymore. This was about his daughter's safety. This was about peace. Finally, Daniel pinned the leader against the wall, his forearm pressing hard against his throat. "You will never come near her again," he said through gritted teeth. "You will never come near this town again." The leader gasped, his eyes wide with fear for the first time. You can't stop all of us." Daniel leaned closer, his voice low and deadly calm. "I don't need to stop all of you. I just need to make sure you understand what happens if you try." He released the man, letting him collapse to the ground. The others groaned, too weak to rise. Daniel picked up the discarded gun, emptied the bullets, and tossed it aside. "Leave," he ordered. "And if you ever think about coming back, remember this night." The leader scrambled to his feet, nodding frantically. Within minutes, the men were gone, their vehicles speeding off into the distance. The warehouse fell silent. Daniel stood in the middle of a wreckage, breathing hard, but his eyes steady. Emily rushed inside, relief flooding her face. "Daniel, you did it." He shook his head. "No, We did what had to be done. By the time they returned to town, dawn was breaking. Daniel picked up his daughter from the neighbor's house, lifting her into his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder, safe and warm. In the days that followed, the story spread again, but this time the whispers carried a new tone. Respect, admiration, even awe. People finally knew the truth, that the quiet carpenter at the edge of town was once a Navy SEAL, a man who had walked away from war but never lost the heart of a protector. Daniel didn't bask in the attention. He didn't want to. For him, it wasn't about glory or stories. It was about the little girl who held his hand as they walked to the bus stop, about the quiet mornings making breakfast, about giving her a safe life he never thought he could provide. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Emily stood with him on the porch. "You know," she said softly, "people here see you differently now." Daniel looked out at the horizon, his daughter playing in the yard. "Let them see what they want. I don't care about their stories." Emily smiled faintly. "Then what do you care about?" Daniel's eyes softened. "Her. That's all that matters." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the last echoes of danger. For the first time in years, Daniel felt peace again, not the fragile kind built on hiding, but the strong kind built on truth. And as the sun set behind the hills, the quiet father, once a shadow of a soldier, finally stood whole. Not just as a Navy SEAL, not just as a man with a past, but as the father who had faced the storm and won.